Hello, everyone. This is Mike Orth here from the Customer Solutions Centers, welcoming you to my session on what's new in VxRail. And let's get stuck in here. So there's been a new update to vSphere 7 and vSphere 7 Update 1 for VxRail, which has been really easy to consume. So if you're an existing VxRail customer on 4.7, you should know by now, you just need to do a lifecycle management upgrade with VxRail, and you get to take advantage with the single bundle file, the new features that are released with the upgrade. So earlier this month, we had Update 1 come out. In my lab here in Limerick, I was able to implement some of this stuff and take a look at it. Some of the new features I'll talk about a little bit here, and then maybe we'll do a demo as well and pop over to the lab. That's the idea behind it. So one of the interesting features that just came out and was released for vSphere 7 Update 1 was HCI Mesh. Don't have that running in my lab yet, but it sounds like a pretty interesting feature. We're going to be allowing stranded vSAN storage to be shared between clusters. So basically, once I have two clusters set up in my lab, I'll be able to attach one to the other and access storage outside of cluster 1 and use it in cluster 2. I might show you in the demo what it's going to look like and where the feature is. We also now have compression only mode. So it used to be that you either use dedupe and compression together or not at all in your cluster. Now you have an option to just turn on compression only mode. There's been a real great performance boost with Update 1 on vSphere 7 as well. Don't have any exact numbers, but just that update from vSphere 7.0 to vSphere 7 Update 1 meant that customers can now take advantage of the compression services in their vSAN clusters while still getting loads of performance across their cluster. They won't see a big performance hit there. So really interesting to get those efficiencies as well as the performance together. There's a lot of other features in here like encryption and file service enhancements and stuff like that. We'll take a look in the demo where we can enable them. We also are leveraging VxRail as a core building block for the SDDC, and VCF on VxRail is a big solution, a big part of what a lot of customers are leveraging when they want to move further up that stack with vSphere, with VMware, and install some of their, or leverage some of their really software-defined data center, cloud-enabled solutions. So VCF is a big draw in my lab as well. So now with the new features in 4.1 for VCF, we are seeing capability like remote cluster support. So you can connect those edge clusters or remote sites back to the main management domain cluster in your main site. That has a flexibility that's going to be very interesting for a lot of customers that have multiple sites or edges where they don't want to have a full-blown VCF cluster deployed, but they want to take advantage of that SDDC capability and automation that's baked into VCF and VMware Cloud Foundation. There's also some updates around lifecycle management. So now we're bundling in the ability to lifecycle manage vRealize and those components on top. That's going to be very interesting, as well as the ability to remove nodes. So customers who want to scale infrastructure up and down and be able to remove node, those workloads are now automated and baked into the SDDC manager experience with VCF on Rail. So we are continuing to support customers who don't want to move to vSphere 7, right? We have multiple code stream support. So there are enhancements around 6.7 that come again as that single bundle file that bring lots of updates and capability, but at the pace that a customer wants to consume it. There are sometimes reasons you don't want to necessarily move to the latest version, vSphere 7. Maybe your applications or your own governance within the company means you want to stay back on an older version of 6.7. Maybe it's integrating with other solutions outside of VxRail that require that. that's fine. We are providing those bundle updates for those customers as well in the same easy to consume fashion. And when they're ready to move from 4.7 and 6.7 of vSAN and move on to vSphere 7, single bundle file unlocks some of that capability. So let me move on here a bit. We also wanted to cover today a little bit about SmartFabrics services for VxRail. If you're not familiar with this, it is the ability to leverage Dell Technologies networking fabric, our switches at the top of rack and now at the leaf spine, and automate this configuration on day 0 when we deploy the cluster. So we were one of the first HCI vendors to turn on this capability over a year ago now. And initially it was day 0, deploying your VxRail cluster, include Dell switches, and we will, using the operating system OS 10, which is embedded in our switches, turn on a feature called SmartFabrics Services and fully automate and configure the VxRail cluster deployment on day 0. We hand over to the customer vSphere with a plugin to be able to control the switches directly. So on that note, let me just see if I can pop over to my demo environment really quickly and maybe take a look at what that looks like in vSphere. So here I have a cluster that I'm running that has vSphere 7. It's not update 1, this one, but it's vSphere 7. I've upgraded it from 6.7. And in here, I built it on the SmartFabric network. So as you can see, the plugin is installed directly in vSphere. So we're really speaking to the vSphere admin here. The vSphere admin can now manage the top of rack and even the leaf spine across their network directly from within vSphere without having to have a deep, well, not having the requirement to ping the networking person to go and configure the host ports, for example, right? So if they're expanding the cluster and they need to add another node, somebody has to make the configuration change on the host ports for that new node joining the cluster. Now, if we take a look, we have full visibility of our topology. So if I, yeah, this is a good view here now. So here you can see my leaf switches here. These are actually where my VxRail cluster is deployed on these 2 switches. And I also wanted to expand to my lab beyond just a single rack. So you can start with just the 2 top of rack switches. And later, if you find you need to scale to the rack next door, you can implement the leaf spine network by simply racking and cabling more SmartFabric switches, so 2 leaves in the rack next door, and then I connect up my 2 spine switches, plug in my interconnects between the leaves and the spines, and the configuration on the top of rack is automatically pushed across the fabric. I didn't need to go into the switches and configure up the interconnections or any of the host port settings for the clusters. That is done again automatically by VxRail Manager and the HCI system software on day 0 when we deploy it. And then obviously we have this plugin to manage it afterwards. So the orange cables here are my uplinks back to the rest of the core network, which could be the rest of maybe your Dell network, or if you had another vendor switch in the data center and you don't want to standardize everything on Dell Technologies switches, that's fine. We can make those connections from there. The uplinks can be moved from leaf to spine as I see fit. So here is where I would go to create new uplinks if I wanted to, or edit and change the existing ones. So I can make layer 2 and layer 3 and select my port, etc., and allow that configuration to be done here. Again, I don't need to contact a separate network team to do any of this work. Over here, you can see if I want to manage some of the ports within my SmartFabric switches, so the switches that VxRail is using for top of rack, I don't have to only leverage ports in those switches for VxRail. I can configure and enable those ports. For example, a backup appliance. So here I have an IDPA that I want to connect into a Dell integrated data protection appliance. I want to use that in the same switch where VxRail is living, but I don't want to carry all the vSAN storage traffic networks necessarily on these ports. So I can edit and change the networks for each individual port if you had a different appliance, or if you wanted to have untagged or tagged networks on these ports, for example, maybe a physical server or a different solution outside of VxRail. So that's great. The network switches don't need to be just dedicated to VxRail anymore. Big, powerful piece of this automation is the ability of the vSphere admin from this console now to be able to do tasks that normally they would have to rely on, a network engineer to do. For example, upgrading of the switches. So now if I want to upgrade the top of rack or the spine switches, I can just upload the new switch package, the bin file here directly in the interface. Because SmartFabric is cluster aware, it will only do one switch at a time in a rolling upgrade fashion, quite similar to the lifecycle management experience you have with a multi-node vSAN VxRail cluster, right? It'll evacuate, in that case, it'll evacuate VMs and do it in a non-destructive manner. Here, it's just going to patch one switch at a time. When the switch comes back up after, say, a reboot, and comes back into the SmartFabric fabric, it will know that it's healthy and then move on to the next switch. So I did this upgrade against my leaf and spine switches recently, and it just rolled through the switches in a seamless manner. I didn't even notice. It was very easy. I also have this automation here, which is interesting. This is when you have a switch that you need to replace, for example. So I actually, you might have noticed in the topology, I had a switch that was kind of sitting off on its own. So that switch I decommissioned in the lab last week, but I didn't run this automation. I replaced that switch with a different model spine switch. So what I end up doing is picking the new spine switch, telling SmartFabric what the old switch is. And if I hit this button, it's going to completely remove it from the topology here. So I'll just show you. It's sitting there orphaned because I physically unconnected it, but now I want to remove it from the actual configuration of SmartFabric. So really, really powerful. Again, this was simple to do, and the configuration on the two new spine switches was automatically pushed. I didn't have to do any CLI tasks directly at the switches. It was very, very easy. Last thing on the Fabric actions is around backup and restore. So we now have a capability to back up the configuration on your switches. This was something that if you're talking to a network admin, they really wanted to be able to see, right? Yeah, it's great to have all this automation, and I want to leverage as much automation as possible with SmartFabric, but any self-respecting network engineer wants to have a backup plan as well, right? So this enables the vSphere admin to be able to take a configuration backup of those SmartFabric switches if at a later date some sort of disaster happens and they have to start again and completely rebuild the configuration that's captured on the switches. But for the most part, hopefully that will never come to pass and they won't need to do that. So that's SmartFabric. Let's come back here now. Cool. So another element of the HCI system software, I mentioned this earlier. This is kind of where our VxRail Manager IP really is, right? We have a huge amount of capability here that isn't just lifecycle management. There's a lot of automation baked into vSphere. We also have API capability like vCenter, and vSphere has API capability. The VxRail Manager has its own API capability. But today I want to focus on an element called the SAS MultiCluster Management piece. So you may have heard of this before. We used to have it called ACE. It's now been rebranded, and we're leveraging a new name. It's bit of a mouthful, SAS MultiCluster Management, but it's the same solution as before. So this is an offering that is actually running on our cloud, that you connect your VxRail manager clusters from using the heartbeat, the phone home capability, directly up to support. This enables support to more quickly help VxRail customers out if something goes wrong. If a disk was to fail, for example, across 4 nodes of your cluster, maybe a single disk was to fail, you want vSAN to self-heal, and it does. It will kick the disk out of the cluster. It will take any data that was on it and spread it out somewhere else in spare capacity. And then it will evict that disk from the cluster and create an alert or an alarm. It's that alert or an alarm that will be sent via the heartbeat, that phone home, back to Dell EMC support, and then we can action on that, right? We can see that the disk is under warranty, and we can send you out a replacement. So what we're doing with ACE is with MyVxRail and SAS MultiCluster Management, is allow our customers to log directly into that portal, which sits on our cloud, and have a view or a dashboard into the health and the state of their cluster. So rather than just talk about it, let me flip over to, sorry now, this was something we were trying to practice. Yeah, to my ACE dashboard here. So as you can see here, I'm logged into myvxrail.dell.com. So I'm leveraging my username and password, but each VxRail customer will have their own account and password. You'll log into that, and you'll only then see the dashboard for your own clusters, okay? So here you can see I have, across the customer solution centers, we have many sites, and we have a lot of VxRail customers installed across those sites. So we connected them up to MyVxRail and this dashboard for us to be able to see the kind of state of all of our clusters. Whether they're in the same region or location or not, it doesn't matter. There's no connectivity needed between sites to appear in the dashboard. It's that customer ID and that logon that allows that. So when you have a cluster based in Europe, maybe in North America, and maybe out in Asia, this will allow you to see them all from a single pane of glass, and be able to see the state of your many different clusters spread around the globe. Very, very powerful stuff, very interesting for customers that have multiple sites, but it's still a good tool even if you have a single VxRail cluster, right? So what I'm showing you here, this is the basic offering that is included as a VxRail customer. All you have to do is turn on that heartbeat, and 24 hours later, once the data is being sent up, you can access this dashboard. Doesn't cost anything extra to take a look at these features that I'm going to show you here. So you have the health score dashboard. So we might tab into these. You can see that I have 14 different clusters or sites with 55 different hosts, and I have some that are green, yellow, and red. I also have a summary down here of the different versions of code that each of those VxRail clusters are running on. So that's really a quick heads up display to be able to see if there's a cluster that I need to upgrade or target, or what version the different clusters on, even if they're being managed by different people locally at those sites. I have one great view of all this. So if I delve into one of my clusters here, I'm gonna take a look at the one in Tokyo, for example. I get all of the detail as I feed into just that one site, and I get the health score for that site, which is quite high. It's green, it's 97. Where is the error for that site? Let me go to the health score, drill into the details, and you can see here that what ACE is doing is VxRail Manager, and I keep calling it ACE, and MyVxRail are working together to provide that telemetry data, those alerts and alarms, right? So I actually have 2 alarms here. I have the time that each of these things has happened. I have a description of what they are, and then I can click over here and see maybe what exactly is the fix for this. So there's a link to a knowledge base article, for example. Each of these different issues have different levels of seriousness or impact to the cluster. So that's where the impact score comes into play, right? So some of these are -1, some of these are -2, some of them are -5. The bigger the impact, obviously the higher or the quicker you go from green to yellow to red, right? It subtracts from your 100%. Every cluster starts out 100% green initially, right? So what we want to really happen here is the people managing the clusters, the VxRail clusters, to know, what exactly are these alerts and alarms, and which ones do I need to be more concerned about because they have a higher impact to the running of my workloads on my cluster. So that's what we're leveraging there. We also have a storage dashboard, which is going to calculate the usage of storage across my clusters, right? So I'm just focusing on the one cluster here, and there isn't much usage here, so it's quite flat. Over time, as my workloads consume storage, this will start to tick up and trend up, right? You can see here, it's a very simple calculation, how many days left until I'm full. So as I start to consume storage, this number will grow, and the days until full will tick down. What I really care about is how much time do I have to either acquire more resources or target workloads that are, maybe over provisioned. And I can contact the teams that are deploying them and ask them, are they still in use? And maybe I can pare back some resources. There's a VM tab, which just shows us the biggest VMs running on this particular cluster in terms of space or CPU or memory. So this should help us to be able to pick and choose maybe some low-hanging fruit that I could say, maybe this VM is over provisioned and I can claw back some resources there. So it's not always about scaling out the cluster necessarily. We also have a performance tab where we are tracking CPU, memory, disk, and networking performance. So what we're trying to do here essentially is establish a baseline. What we want to see is when you turn on the heartbeat in the phone home, we'll immediately start collecting data. And then you start deploying workloads into this. And over time, we'll collect a rich set of data that says, normally the workload should be running at this level for CPU and memory and disk. But it looks like every once in a while, there is a trend to it for it to spike, right? So we can drill into this detail and start to see maybe anomalies, right? Where a particular workload seems to spike on the third Monday of every month at a certain time, right? Well, based on collecting this data, we can start to then, on our side, make some analytics against that and maybe offer back to our customers the ability to predict when this is going to happen and offer maybe a suggestion on how they could reconfigure the workload or the cluster to prevent it happening in future. So that is an offering that will come in future with this SaaS offering of MyVxRail. And if customers see a value in that, they can subscribe to those extra capabilities. But again, that's something over and above the default or the basic level that every VxRail customer can take advantage of with this. We also have the ability, customers wanted to be able to do that lifecycle management, not just at the VxRail cluster and log on to each cluster and do it. They wanted to have one place where they could see all of their sites and all of their clusters and orchestrate the upgrade. So even if the cluster is sitting in a completely different region, you can see what updates are available for your cluster here. This now is a licensable feature. It's an example of one of the things that if a customer saw value in this, they could subscribe to this feature over and above the basic level. So coming back into my cluster, just wanted to show you where you enable that. So here under support is where we would enable our support account and we would turn on our heartbeat, our secure remote service, which is just can be just a virtual appliance that runs on top, or maybe you have one already at your site and you can point VxRail at that. And then this is where you can get some more information about the VxRail cloud-based multi-cluster management that we were just talking about, and connect to the MyVxRail portal afterwards. So back on track now. So there's also the capability of, in vSphere 7, of Tanzu on VxRail. If you're not familiar with this, this is VMware's re-architecting of the ESX platform, their hypervisor, to be able to do both VMs and containers together, right? This was simply a software update from my 6.7 to vSphere 7 cluster. So I was delighted to be able to know that I don't have to learn how to do Kubernetes the hard way. In a very, very quick space of time, I was able to deploy this directly into my cluster and turn it on with that bundle upgrade. And it means now for infrastructure engineers who have never touched containers before, have not worked with their developers in satisfying the needs of the infrastructure that they require, you now can leverage VMware and vSphere and vSphere 7 to be able to rapidly adopt this and add it into your environment. So I take a look. I actually have a VCF on VxRail cluster as well, where I'm running SDDC Manager. And in this particular one, I have enabled the Kubernetes workload management piece. So underneath it all is my VxRail cluster. So you can see I have multiple workload domains here in SDDC Manager. And I just needed to log in here for a second. There we go. Yeah, and here in my second workload domain, in my cluster, I have my namespaces for Tanzu and for my container environment deployed directly on top of this 4-node VxRail cluster, right? So here is where I can manage those workspaces directly from within vSphere. So workload management is the kind of new screen where you jump to that, but that's the view of the VMs and containers being run together. So whether it's supervisor clusters running on this or guest clusters running within the system, you have lots of flexibility to give developers the tools they need to access their cloud native environments while having a simplified vSphere experience for those infrastructure admins who are kind of maybe managing this for the first time for their teams. So really, really interesting capability. Keep an eye on this space. It's getting easier and easier. Initially, it was a VCF on VxRail when they went GA with this launch. Now you have lots of options within your clusters to actually turn on Kubernetes workloads with or without NSX. Go back to my other cluster if I can. So I have another vSphere 7 Update 1 cluster here, where I have workload management not enabled, just to give you a picture of what that looks like. And so this is vSphere 7 Update 1, and it walks me through how I can turn on the Kubernetes workloads in vSphere. Lots of options. Like I said, we can leverage it with VCF, we can leverage it with NSXT, or we can even deploy a load balancer and turn on the Tanzu capability directly in vSphere. So really, really interesting, very flexible way of kind of doing this. Right, so I know that was really quick and fast, but I hope I gave you at least a peek into some of the new features in vSphere 7, some of the automation and capability that we've baked into VxRail, both in MyVxRail and SmartFabric capability, and now Tanzu and the container capability as well. So it's really interesting. If you need more information, just reach out to the teams and we can set something up to get you access. Thanks very much.